As we mentioned, President Trump went on social media about an hour or so ago here and announced a phased-in ceasefire between Israel and Iran. Now, this follows the U.S. attacking Iranian nuclear facilities this weekend, which prompted Iran to fire missiles at a U.S. air base in the Middle East. For an overview of all this, we welcome Dr. Evelyn Farkas, Executive Director of the McCain Institute. Always a pleasure. Good to have you here, Evelyn. Thank you so much for your time. First of all, what do we make? I mean, we're recording this about 4 o'clock Monday afternoon here. It's been an hour now. Do we really know what's going on with this ceasefire?
Well, no, Ted, because this is kind of an unconventional announcement where the U.S. president, which isn't supposedly party to this war, is announcing that there's a ceasefire between Iran and Israel, but we don't see any statements coming out of those capitals. And so I'm not really sure whether we can consider it a credible statement until the leaders of those two countries also acknowledge that they are actually working towards a ceasefire.
And if they do, let's go ahead and say that there was some sort of agreement and the president just went ahead and announced on social media what maybe they wanted to wait for him to announce. Be that as it may, does that mean that the U.S. bombing on Iranian nuclear facilities, was that a success?
Well, I would say in the short term, Ted, that it was a success, and it follows Israeli success bombing nuclear sites and military sites as well. So we know that the Iranian nuclear weapons program has been set back, and that is a success. The rest, of course, remains to be seen. What happens in the medium to long term? Does the Iranian government have an ability to reconstitute? How quickly can they do it? And in the meantime, what happens internally in Iran? Those are all really important points. But the most important point is having a ceasefire and then a negotiation with the outside parties to make sure that the war that started between Israel and Iran is definitively over.
And yet you talk negotiations just hours after the U.S. bombed the Iranian nuclear facilities. Iran emphasized no more talks with the U.S. They can't be trusted because of the deception that Iran saw involved. Do they have a point?
Well, they have a point, but this is all diplomacy, and this is all, this falls into the category, I think, of diplomatic bluster. Iran is weakened. It's in their interest right now to negotiate. Honestly, it's in their interest even to negotiate in bad faith. They just cannot afford to be hit militarily again. But by the same token, if they don't negotiate in good faith, they know that they have an American president who's not predictable. And frankly, they also have the threat of sanctions because this hasn't been covered very widely. But the agreement that the Obama administration signed, the United States left under President Trump, and this was an agreement to halt Iran's nuclear weapons program. The Europeans actually, when the sanctions were lifted by the Europeans and the U.S. ultimately wasn't part of the agreement anymore, they had a snapback, so a provision where they could reinstate sanctions on Iran. If Iran looks like it's not negotiating in good faith, and by the way, even before these attacks by Israel, the UN inspectors, the UN agency responsible for the inspections, had already come out with a statement basically pointing a finger at Iran saying they were in violation. If Iran doesn't come back into agreement, seem to be in compliance with ending or putting a halt on their nuclear weapons program, the Europeans can sanction them, and they don't want that either.
So they don't, obviously, they're not in a good position. Iran is simply not in a good position in a variety of ways, but they can cause havoc and they can make a mess. Strait of Hormuz, you can cause problems there. Oil prices, you can cause problems there. Are those serious issues right now, or is the way this is playing, are those a little bit in the background?
I think, Ted, it looks like they've made the calculus that Tehran, has as much to lose from closing the Straits of Hormuz as any other country because they rely on that mode of transportation, that area, to also get their oil and gas out to the larger markets. We know that China gets about 80 something percent, I think it's 84% of its oil and gas from Iran, actually, through those straits. And about, I think, 15% of the total oil goes through there. So it will cause a lot of pain, especially in Asia. And I'm not sure that the Iranians want to also inflict the pain on themselves. In addition to that, I would say that the Europeans are watching this closely because it's not in their interest to watch the oil prices go up because in another part of the world, they're trying to have the oil prices reduced so that Vladimir Putin, who's still able to sell oil on the open market, doesn't make as much money to put into his war against Ukraine.
I'm glad you mentioned Putin. Russia has been very, very quiet throughout all of this. What do you make of that?
I think it's because Russia recognizes that, number one, this is a nice diversion from what they're doing to Iran, to Ukraine. I mean, they have been lobbing a lot of missiles and drones at the Ukrainian population. Second, of course, they don't mind the crisis drawing out and potentially raising the price of oil, but they probably don't want to say so publicly because they might make Beijing angry.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I think for them, it's just being quiet and watching this play out. There's no downside to that for them right now.
I was going to say, and Iran is probably saying, thanks a lot. Such a friend you are.
Well, that's the downside, that they look less reliable.
And yes, they look less strong. What about what's going on in Iran with the populace, with the people? How are they handling, the U.S. airstrikes? Obviously, we're targeting nuclear facilities, not residential areas, these sorts of things. But there's always been a talk that the population there is restless. They don't like the leadership. They're looking for change. Does this tilt things one way or the other?
Yeah, it is interesting to see how this plays out. It depends on what happens next. So, of course, the Iranian people, while they are proud, and I'm sure they would be proud to have the nuclear weapon, but they are very angry at this current theocracy, the dictatorship of the religious that have ruled them for these decades. We know most of the women are opposed, and most Iran experts say that there's only about 20% of the population that supports supports the government, the regime. The other thing is, of course, that Iran is made up of different ethnic groups, so not everyone is Persian ethnicity. So it is an interesting situation internally. Israel has made the situation a little bit more difficult because they have struck some civilian targets, like one of the major newsrooms, and so that caused the Iranian people, of course, to feel a bit of nationalism, to include some of the dissidents. So they have spoken out against Israel and against these strikes. So it's complicated and nuanced, but I think if Israel were to stop, if we were to have a ceasefire, then I think the Iranian people would be free, frankly, to not worry about nationalism and threats from the outside, but to take matters into their own hands internally.
Well, taking matters into their own hands internally could mean something as serious as a civil war. Is that a possibility here?
Well, a civil war is always possible if you are dealing with a government that falls into crisis or collapses. So if the military turns against the theocratic regime, against the Ayatollahs, then the question is, what happens next? Is someone able to then take control? Can the political powers that be in opposition and the outside forces, frankly, the United States, the European Union, and others, broker some kind of transitional government until you can get to elections, which is, by the way, what we did in Ukraine. I mean, the leadership, essentially, the military shot civilians and then realized they didn't want to be on the wrong side of history. So, and the people definitely abandoned the Kremlin-backed leader in 2014. And so the international community stepped in and brokered a transition with all the opposition forces, Russia, the European Union, the United States. So we've seen this happen before. It's possible. But you can't bring about regime change, Ted, through bombs. You really need a ceasefire, and you need the people in Iran to sort this out for themselves.
Okay, last question here, because we're running out of time, but I want to get your thoughts on what do we look for next?
Well, I think we look for Israeli missiles to stop flying through the air, because that would indicate a ceasefire, and same for the Iranians. And then we look for real negotiations, because ultimately we have to put Iran's nuclear ambition, get it deeply buried underground, hopefully until there can be a new regime, which is essentially what happened in the example of Syria, where Syria's nuclear facilities were also bombed, and Bashar al-Assad pretty much gave up on the nuclear experiment, and eventually, of course, he was overthrown.
All right, great information. Dr. Evelyn Farkas, again, the McCain Institute. Always good to see you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ted, for the opportunity.